or a story being lost to another newspaper, 3/4 of the staff would have been on disciplinaries. That's the nature of, as part of the cut and thrust of Sunday newspapers. And in any event, it was a story about whether or not Arsenal would be wearing purple shirts. It wasn't an exclusive about who was the next manager of England, for example.
And then later, in 2006, this is paragraph 130, you see that? Mr. Wallace, that's
yes.
Witness we've heard here, reported to Mr. Coulson. Mr. Coulson's response is instructive. He stated by email to Mr. Wallace, dated 19th July 06, wants him out as quickly and cheaply as possible. Do you remember that email?
In so much as I've been reminded of it, both through this tribunal and before. Again, I've asked for all the emails, so I don't know what the exact context of it was. I don't know what came before or followed afterwards.
I think all the tribunal is saying is there's a bit of a pattern here, if you follow me. Certainly if you marry up the November 05 email with the 06 email, it's consistent. You want this man out unreasonably, you're bullying him.
Well, the first point,
truth, isn't it?
No, it's not the truth. The first point to make is that in between times, it was clear that I'd supported Mr. Dunn in actually trying to get Mr. Driscoll's kind of relationship with the News of the World back on track. The other point I would make is that at some time, many months, several months before I sent this email, Mr. Driscoll himself had instigated severance negotiations with the paper. So my recollection is that this email, want him out as quickly and cheaply as possible, is absolutely in relation to that process.
Okay, so you disagree then with the tribunal's clear findings, is that right?
Yes, I do.
I think that's as far as I can really take that issue, Mr. Coulson. So all the questions I had for you, was there anything you particularly wanted to say, which you feel we might have left out?
Can I make one point in relation to the theory that there was some kind of deal between News Corps or News International and the Conservative Party over the issue of B-Sky B? And I just make one very straightforward point. If there was a deal, and if there was a conspiracy, as people seem to be suggesting, why was Vince Cable given the job? It is in the Prime Minister's gift to decide who. Of course, there was the complex nature of the coalition, but it was the Prime Minister's gift to decide who held which brief in his cabinet. So if there was this theory, if there was this conspiracy running, that David Cameron was going to somehow or the other return the favour to News International, why on earth did he give it to, and I'll choose my words carefully, a combative member of the Liberal Democrat Party?
Of course, Mr. Cable was already the business secretary in May 2010, was he not? The B-Sky B bid would fall within his province, and that wasn't announced till June 2010.
No, but the conspiracy, I think suggests that this was a deal that was done some time before.
All right, well, it's an advocacy point rather than a factual point. Can I ask a very different question? You probably, as much if not more than anyone else, have doubtless reflected on the issue which is at the core of this particular part of the inquiry, which was of course set up by the Prime Minister in July last year. And the issue is whether the relationship between the press and the politicians has become either close or no longer entirely conducive to good government, whichever way you want to put it. Now, whether this happened many years ago, whether it's a consequence of the involvement of those who've been very heavily concerned with newspapers into the heart of communications in government, one could debate. But I would like your view on whether that relationship has become too close so that it gets in the way, and how that should be addressed, if you've got a view on it.
Well, the Prime Minister himself has said that he accepts that it got too cosy, and I'm not minded to disagree with him. I think that it's perfectly clear now, as a result of this process, that the relationships with the media have got in the way of the message, let's put it that way. I think that is abundantly clear. What you do about it, I think, is much more difficult, because I would hate to think that, I'm not suggesting that this is on your mind, sir, but I would hate to think that any barriers would be erected, more barriers would be erected between politics, or politicians, but politics more importantly, and the press. I think that you've only got to look at the turnout at last week's local elections, which was low, to say the least. People are disengaging with politics. And if you erect more barriers, if you make it more difficult for the media to report on politics, if you make it more difficult for journalists to understand what it is you're trying to do, that's going to get an awful lot worse. And some people may say that that turnout is because of this inquiry or because of people's general reaction of what's been reported over the last months. I'm not sure I buy that theory. I come from the perspective of someone who's worked on both sides of the fence, and I just sincerely hope, sir, with respect, that the result of this part of the inquiry does not, as I say, erect yet more barriers between what is already a pretty difficult process.
Well, if you'd heard what I said earlier today, you would know that I'm very keen on ensuring that politicians have a mechanism to identify what their policies are and to seek to engage the public in them, and that journalists have the ability and responsibility to hold politicians and others, in which number I've always included the judiciary, to account for what they do. The question is how to ensure that that happens in an open, transparent and appropriate way. Now, it may be you haven't got an answer, but if from your experience working both sides of the fence you do have a view, it's not going to bind me, so you don't need to worry about it. I'd be interested to hear it. If not, then not.
Well, it is incredibly difficult. I mean, one point that troubles me in evidence, if I can say, that's come out throughout this inquiry, is the idea that a friendship is always based on some ulterior motive. People are friends. People talk to each other, and that's certainly true of the overlap between politics and the press.
I'm not so sure that's fair, because equally, I have said not once but many times that politicians are entitled to be friends with people, journalists are entitled to be friends with people. The question is to differentiate and to be clear about the difference between social relationships and any form of business.
Yes, I agree. I have to say, I think that what's happened over the course of the last couple of years, perhaps over the course of the last year or so, I think is going to solve that problem for you. I think the possibility now of politicians not being transparent about their dealings with the media, I think just the events that have come to pass will go a long way to dealing with that.
Well, if I could be assured that the very fact of the last 7 months had achieved the purpose so that I could go back to productive judicial work, I might be quite pleased with that. But that's a bit of a big leap,
I'm not going
isn't it?
I wouldn't be so bold as to suggest that, sir.
No. All right. All right.
Could I just say, while Mr. Coulson that I think what he may have had in mind is paragraph 107 of the Tribunal's decision in the Driscoll case, because they do there say it was a pretext for Mr. Coulson's desire to, quote, get shot of the claimant.
Yes, well...
But I think that may be in the passage that he had in mind.
I'm sure that's right. But Mr. Roger Davis, as you know, and I know, sometimes judgments don't always spell out all the dots, and I take the point there. Mr. Coulson, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, sir.
I understand why this has not been an easy process, but there it is. It's been important. Thank you very much. Right.
Sir, did you want to hear submissions in relation to Mr. Sherborne's application?
Well, I certainly do, but I'm not so sure that 4:30 is the right time to hear them. I put them off to today, anticipating that we would be rather speedier than we have been. So, are you anticipating being here tomorrow, Mr. White?
Absolutely. I'm not pressing. We've had a long day and covered a lot of territory.
Yes. Then I think that's probably what we'll do. Does that cause you difficulty, Mr. Kaplan?
No, sir, not at all.
No, I just need to address it, in which regard, let me just, now you're on your feet, remind you that in relation to one of the points that Mr. Sherborne was making about information being stored was raised, I apprehend, probably as a result of a question suggested to Mr. J by Mr. Sherborne on day 37, the 6th of February, in the afternoon, page 60, line 12, and Mr. Dacre said, let me inquire and come back to you, and I'm not sure he has.
He hasn't. I'm not sure he was. It was a number of items were followed up, but can I deal with that tomorrow as well?
Yes, of course. Well,
I've noticed the same passage and the questions that were asked.
I raise it with you so that you can deal with it.
Thank you. So can I just ask, would you be minded to deal with this at first thing or later in the morning?
Oh, I think that it's probably fairer to the witness tomorrow that we just crack on, and that when we finish the witness, we'll come back to these interesting issues.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.